Okay, let's see if we can get the microphone to pick me up today. I'm keeping it closer. Hope I don't bump it too many times, but that seems to help with the volume issues. And I have not yet re-listened to the one I uploaded last time that people were saying they couldn't hear me, so I'll have to see how the uploaded stream went volume-wise. Anyway, fragile faith, having to do with the issue of the balance between our freedom in Christ and our responsibility to be considerate. So, what prompted it was that a few hours ago I came across someone teaching that eating only vegetables brings a person closer to God, and that Jesus didn't eat meat, and that Paul taught Christians not to eat meat. But I think you can tell that the scripture says something else entirely. So, and I assume this is recording. It seems to be running as far as I can tell. I don't know about the volume yet because nobody is saying anything yet in chat. So anyway, let's look at these scriptures that I have up here. We have from both testaments about the issue, as using the issue of eating meat as a good illustration of the more general principle of being considerate of other people as Christians. And, you know, that this is a problem that can go both ways, whether those who are abstaining from something or those who think others should abstain. So God's covenant with Noah is in Genesis 9:1-3, and it says, God blessed Noah, so that's a blessing, not a curse. Noah and his sons, saying to them, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth. The fear and dread of you will fall on all the beasts of the earth, and on the birds in the sky, and on every creature that moves along the ground, and on all the fish of the sea. They are given into your hands. Everything, verse 3, that lives and moves about will be food for you. Just as I gave you the green plants, I now give you everything. Nobody disputes that God originally had Adam and Eve eating fruit, everything that just grew on trees in the garden. After sin, they had to scratch the ground for their food and grow vegetables. And then after the flood here, we can see that animals were given for food. This is a blessing. Okay, and God doesn't seem to have a problem with people eating animals. It's a blessing, and I'm going to go with his sensibilities above all. Let's also read Deuteronomy 14:6. You may eat, this is the laws of Moses, of course, you may eat any animal that has a divided hoof and choose the cut. So there, it's narrowed down here for the Jews under the priesthood of Levi in the laws of Moses that people had to eat only certain animals, but they still ate animals. That's the point. And then in Exodus 12:5, it says, the animals you choose for the sacrifice must be year-old males without defect, and you may take them from the sheep or the goats. So for a specific, actually the Passover meal, you had to be very precise about what you chose and it had to be without defect. So eating meat is not forbidden. It is sometimes restricted, at least for the Jews, but it's not forbidden. And in none of those laws and anything anywhere in the Bible will you find excuses being made for any kind of animal abuse. And in fact, there's one place I just popped into my head that God was rebuking Israel, and there were some people in particular who were maiming oxen for fun, and God had a problem with that. So there is nothing in the Bible that says you should make an animal suffer. Okay? And killing an animal is not making it suffer. They just lights out if you do it right, and people should be careful to do that right. Anyway, New Testament, the Last Supper, Luke 22:7-8, then came the day of unleavened bread on which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed, and I've got that in my chronology of the life of Jesus document. I'm sure I've linked to that before, about all the different things that happened at different times. Anyway, Jesus sent Peter and John saying, go and make preparations for us to eat the Passover. Well, why would he do that if they weren't going to eat meat? Because the Passover specified meat. You had to eat meat in the Passover. That was the whole point, and the thing that Jesus was about to demonstrate with his own life and death and resurrection was that he was to be the sacrificial lamb, not the sacrificial artichoke. Okay? Volume is still a little bit better. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I can only put the microphone so close, and then I don't want to have it so close that I get the breath pop noise. So hopefully I didn't just do that. Anyway, Jesus was... the sacrifices were pointing to the reality that Jesus would do in being the sacrifice. So he was in the belly of the earth, this sacrificed, innocent, flawless animal was to be in people's bellies overnight. They could leave nothing till morning. There's a reason for all of these things, and it has nothing to do necessarily with making a person healthier, and certainly not with making them more spiritual. What made the people spiritual was in following God's instructions, not the eating or not eating of meat, is the point. And then Matthew 15:11, what Jesus said, what goes into someone's mouth does not defile them, but what comes out of their mouth, that is what defiles them. And he was, in that sentence, declaring everything clean, which also goes with what we'll see from Peter in a little bit. But first, Luke 24:41-43, and while they still not believe it because of joy and amazement after his resurrection, of course, he asked them, do you have anything here to eat? So he's in his resurrected body. And it says in verse 42, they gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he took it and ate it in their presence. So some people would try to argue, just bending over backwards to try to keep Jesus from eating meat, to say, well, he let his disciples eat meat, or he approved of other people eating meat, but he himself did not eat it, because then, anyone who is in him should not eat it as well. That would be the church. And here it is, him at least eating fish. So an animal had to die, okay? And he used that to prove that he was alive and physical, and they weren't seeing a ghost. So Jesus ate meat. And as an observant Jew, he ate meat. So let me, I think I've used all the scriptures there for now. But we can see in what I had listed here that there were like 4 major things going on here. The first was a blessing that meat could be eaten. It's not a curse, it's a blessing. The second is that clean animals were for eating, and in the Levitical law. The third is that Jesus ate the Passover, and what the Passover was, it had to include meat. And that the fourth thing is that food doesn't make you unclean. And by extension, it doesn't make you more spiritual either, to eat or not eat certain things. So not only did the people of Israel eat meat, it was required for the Passover, and Jesus, as an observant Jew or Israelite, celebrated it. So he ate meat. I think we can rest assured that that point is made, that Jesus ate meat. Now, what did Paul teach? So let's look at 2 main passages, those being Romans 14 and 1 Corinthians 8 and 1 Corinthians 10. And what I'm going to do is look at my commentary instead, because you can read those in any version you want. But I have the outline here. And you can see that Romans is what is called a chiastic argument. It goes up to the point X here, which is unity in God, and then there are some subpoints, and all these X, the prime going back, we have these mirror images. That's what makes the X shape, general to specific and out to general in reverse order. That's a chiastic argument, and the whole book of Romans is one of those, and there are some sub-arguments in those, but the turning point of the whole letter is unity in God, the new thing caused by what Jesus did between Jews and Gentiles, no more division and all that. So, and then it goes back down from there in reverse order, and it's hard to show the whole thing on the screen here, but the point is that we're going to look at Romans 14 on the meat-eating issue. So let me go down to where Romans 14 is discussed in the commentary. And almost there. Who wrote all of this? Yeah, this is my commentary. Okay. Paul turns, from how believers relate to society to how believers relate to each other. The immediate context is about to eat or not to eat regards to meat, but the general principle is to keep everything in perspective relative to the gospel and the body of the anointed or the Christ. Yep, I'm going to get to that. Someone whose faith is strong, and these are Paul's terms in Romans 14. Oh, thanks, Chow. Man, I can't talk tonight. Anyway, Someone whose faith is strong and has no qualms about this or that food must not despise someone whose faith is weak. And that's where I got the title of the video from, Fragile Faith, and the picture of the puppy and the baby, because precious things are more fragile. You know, when they're first born, they're more fragile and they have to be protected and cared for. And that's the principle underlying Paul's teachings on these things. So he's saying it's weak, not because there's something wrong with it, but because it's new and hasn't had time to mature and put down deep roots. That's what a weak faith is. It's not because somebody is just, you know, if you do this, you must have weak faith and you should be browbeaten over it. No, it's exactly the opposite. You have to be considerate. Okay, but he says the person who won't eat meat has a weak faith. That's Paul's words. Okay? And their conscience is bothered over certain controversial things. And again, you can extend this to other things besides eating meat or not eating meat. But it goes the other way too. The weak must not despise the strong. And I'm getting this out of Romans 14. So instead of rubbing our personal convictions in each other's faces, we are to keep to ourselves those things we know will bother others in the name of peace. But don't make the mistake of treating important doctrines as something we should keep to ourselves. This passage is about the disputable, controversial matters of personal conviction over things God has not commanded us about. That's why I said in the description about the fact that God is the final boundary maker, but we have some personal freedoms within those boundaries, and the issue of eating meat or not is something God leaves up to us. Okay, and some people, we can do backstory with not just extra biblical things, but even in the Bible where Paul has also talked about food offered to idols, and we'll get to that in 1 Corinthians 15 and 10, I think I said, or 8 and 10, sorry. That this is a matter of balancing, you know, within what God has said we have freedom of, and not destroying someone because of that freedom. So, but it goes both ways, as we saw here in this paragraph, that you can't either say, you know, everybody has to kowtow to my sensitivities, and on the other, you know, and have that person despise anyone who doesn't, and it shouldn't go the other way either, that, oh, your faith is so weak that you're not as spiritual as I am. Okay, so that's what Paul is doing. He's trying to balance these things, and that doctrines taught by God or by authority in the Bible are not those controversial things. They're things that are taught clearly, and those are God's rules. And so we don't cross those boundaries, but within those we have some latitude, and we have to know how to handle that latitude. We are all parts of one body, but those parts are not identical. We have different functions and levels of faith. And again, this is a matter of growth, spiritual growth, or, you know, for whatever reason that some people don't grow at all or grow slowly. It's just something that we have to be aware of. Many today think we should be interchangeable parts and make other people see what we do. We are not each other's judges. God is our judge, and we're his servants. But there is judgment that we have to make, as he said in 1 Corinthians, about the fact that can't you people decide these legal matters, these disputes you have among yourselves, and you go to unbelievers and embarrass everybody. So the judging we're not supposed to do is that someone else is a bad servant. We can judge somebody's behavior as being wallowing in sin, and we have to disfellowship. But again, we're not judging their eternal soul. So that's where the limits of our judging are, and we will each have to answer to how we treated fellow believers. And as I pointed out here, does this equate to no judging at all? Hardly. We're commanded to judge, discern, seek the truth. But in this context, the judging we're not supposed to do is to make ourselves authorities over others. This is part of the whole hierarchy issue that I've gone over many times. The eye cannot demand that the foot answer to it instead of the head, nor can the right hand control the left. But now we get down to the meat-eating issue, especially, again, where he gives his personal opinion, but there's nothing wrong with it, but he leaves the whole matter to individual conscience. He tells us to be sensitive to others, whether they have more or less faith than we have. Food should never be a reason to part fellowship. It's trivial in the kingdom of God, but this is not to be taken as forcing people to violate their own conscience. So that's why we have to be careful that we're not leading people to violate their conscience. Now, if their conscience is more delicate than it should be, that's something that will take time to work on. But we have to remember to be sensitive and gentle about that. So the idea here is not to make everyone think the same thing, but to keep peace by voluntary self-restriction and keep things to ourselves if necessary. Our example is Jesus, who set aside his divine privileges, Philippians 2:5-11, to become one of us. In fact, all of what was written in the Old Testament was recorded for our benefit. We can look at the heroes of old for inspiration. And Paul speaks of the Gentiles' inclusion with the Jews in God's plans, and that all of us who believe are to praise God because of this. So, the context, that's the whole issue of Romans 14 and meat eating, is about finding that balance between, well, first of all, the boundaries as to what is not negotiable and what is, and then within what is, finding boundaries with the idea of the most important thing being not to make other people violate their conscience, nor to condemn someone whose conscience is not violated the way yours it may be on something. Okay, so that's a principle that Paul's teaching. Let me look at the chat real quick. Yeah, it sounds like you're in uncharted waters, and those are always going to be a matter of something you only know the details of, and the rest of us can only pray for guidance. But I do like to try to get general principles out of these things so they can be applied to whatever, and I don't need to know details of what people are facing, but using the meat eating as an example, because that's what got me to do this hangout, is somebody was teaching something that the scriptures just don't teach. Okay, now let me go to the commentary for 1 Corinthians. Whoops, I think I already had that up. Yes, I did. Okay, this also is an outline, but it has some chiastic arguments in it, and I want to look at especially at 8 and 10, and here's why I want to look at 8 and 10, chapters 8 and 10. Look at this section, freedom, rights, and consideration. It's a chiastic argument. And look, it starts with 8 and ends with actually the first verse of 11. That's where the chapter should have ended. But so you can see 8 and 10 are related because it's a chiastic argument, and the center point is deferring our rights out of love or consideration for other people. Okay? And he uses food as an example of that. So you can see the just before the X point we have the C and C prime stumbling blocks, and then food and sacrifices are the next one out from the center, and then love versus knowledge and rights. So, you know, knowledge puffs up and all that. Doesn't mean knowledge is bad. It's just you have to be careful with it and keep it balanced. So that's the reason why 1 Corinthians 8 and 1 Corinthians 10 are a similar topic. But they're from two different angles, because it's a mirror image. But he's making the same point from two sides. So you can read 1 Corinthians 8 and 10 for yourself, but let me go down here to the commentary part. Freedoms, rights, and consideration. You'd think I would just do a search, but oops, I'm already there. And I have that at this point Paul presents his defense concerning his rights as an apostle. That's what he was defending. He has a context too for writing these things, and people are questioning his right to teach with authority. So he says at this point, Paul, or in the commentary I have, Paul presents his defense concerning his rights as an apostle. He will build up from a question about food offered to idols to the broader question of how and when Christians should exercise their rights, then back to the original question in light of his argument. So he sets up his argument, he makes it, and then he re-examines it after having made his argument. So that's why the chiastic form, and that's why you will see some things repeated in different places in the scriptures, especially by Paul. He tends to do that more than the others. So love versus knowledge and rights, this is A, not A prime. Remember which way we're going in that argument. We're still building up to the point. And so as part of the prefacing what he's about to say, he gives the overarching principle that the humility of love is superior to the conceit of knowledge. That is not to say, again, that knowledge is bad. It just means you have to balance it. What he tells them about meat offered to idols is to be understood in that light. That is to say, about balancing whether you should use your rights all the time. You have the rights, just like he said also about the right to be paid for his work. He said, I waived that right. And he told why he waived that right. So that he led by example. He did the things that he was teaching. And hi to Vic, or he said hi to Chow. So he says, let's roll this up a little bit. He gets right to the issue of food and sacrifices. And this is, remember what we talked about with Romans 14. Okay, about weak consciences and that sort of thing. He said, and again, you can have your copy of the scriptures open for this. I'm just reading the commentary, so, we don't have to read it to you, really. Although everything really comes from God, what we eat is irrelevant to our spirits. Many people said to have a weak conscience still think of certain foods being off limits for whatever reason. Now, the particular reason might be, in this case, food offered to idols, but that's not really the issue of spirituality. It's just personal conscience. In spite of our right as believers to eat anything we choose, we need to be considerate of those with a weak conscience when it comes to matters like this that have no bearing on spiritual things. That's why there's freedom. The same principle on how to handle disputable matters is covered more in more detail in Romans 14. So that's why I went over that first, on how we're supposed to handle these things. Hey, Franco. Then he talks about stumbling blocks that we don't want to put in front of especially newer believers in the exercising of our rights. Though the strong may know that there's nothing wrong with eating such meat, even meat offered to idols, in that culture, it's not an issue for us. But with eating meat offered to idols, it becomes wrong when flaunted in front of those who might be emboldened to violate their consciences. In other words, the strong must defer to the weak in these cases. Paul has established this principle not only to answer a question put to him, but also in support of the defense he is about to make concerning his being an apostle. Okay, so he goes into that, and then we're going to go back to the stumbling blocks again. So I'm skipping down there. The first 5 verses are a backdrop to the point Paul will make next. He just finished discussing the need to run the race to win, and the problem of false apostles. Now he's about to issue a warning from history, but note that while it is said that all of them were immersed into Moses, this is a kind of a side point about baptism. They were never literally dunked in water, and God made a point of not allowing it. So any attempt to tie this passage to a requirement for baptizing in water is erroneous. But he goes over that, and then he uses that as an example. So he's doing the same thing we're supposed to be doing, which is using scripture to find principles, okay, and not to be overconfident in our spirituality or standing among other believers. And then he gets back to the food and sacrifices again. I know I went over that part real quick, but I'm trying to stay on the point of what it is about carnivores versus vegetarians or vegans, and giving the full Bible background on the principles behind what Paul says about it, as an example of how Christians should treat each other on controversial matters, or disputable matters, as he put it in Romans 14. It is important to note that this is not an establishing of a ritual known as communion. So, I think I skipped a paragraph there, sorry about that, but back in chapter 8, remember why I was referring to that before in the outline, he brought up the matter of food offered to idols, pointed out the need for being considerate of those with a weaker conscience. Now he's approaching it from another angle, that it's not only individuals we need to consider, but also society. For the sake of their reputation among the lost, Paul recommends that all the believers stay clear of anything that might give society the impression that they have anything to do with idols. That was the problem then in that culture. He contrasts the food offered to them with the bread and wine used to remember the master. In other words, it seems like a contradiction sometimes when you read those two separated passages, that he says idols are nothing, it doesn't matter, it's not a problem, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. But then he says, out in society, they think there's something to it, and if they see you eating food offered to idols, that can do damage. So he's, again, giving the mirror image. It's important to note that this is not establishing of the ritual known as communion, by saying you want to make a contrast between your fellowship meals and food offered to idols. But he's not establishing something called communion or calling this ritual a sacrifice. He's simply wanting to make a distinction between idol worship and Christian gatherings because that was a problem then, in that culture. He's saying it to Corinthian believers. He already made it clear that this is a matter of conscience, and we'll go over it again in the following verses. Again, we're looking at 1 Corinthians 10, verses 15 through 1 Corinthians 10, 15 through 22. Sorry about that. Some say Paul is contradicting himself here. Before he said that idols are nothing, like I just had said, such that eating food that has been offered to them in sacrifice is not wrong in itself. But now he says you cannot eat at the table of the master and of demons. Note, first of all, that Paul just finished talking about partnership, the accurate meaning of koinonia, which is typically translated communion. It means a partnership, that is, immersion. So the eating of food offered to idols is done as part of if the eating of food offered to idols done as a part of a ceremony or ritual, that would make it wrong. In other words, to eat such meat along with those who are considering it a sacrifice is wrong, but to eat it when simply sold to anyone in the marketplace is not wrong. So in those 2 points on either side of the central pivot point of his whole argument is the issue of yes, you have the right to eat anything. God doesn't have a problem with you eating any kind of meat, even if it was offered in some sacrifice. But because of society and because of people with a weak conscience, you probably shouldn't do that. Now, in our society, it's a different issue entirely. It's still between eating meat or not, but the reason is not because meat may be offered to idols. It's because, and even then, it's they're trying to say you shouldn't eat meat at all. But even then, if people want to argue that way, they have to realize what they're saying. That if you say you just can't eat meat offered to idols, they make that what Paul is getting at, then you're saying that there is some meat that's okay to eat. So it doesn't help the vegetarian argument. And then Paul goes back to A prime, the first, where he started the general argument to specific, not to general. He's back to the beginning point again. And he ties it all together and says, whatever you do, glorify God. That's the general principle. Okay? Don't flaunt your freedom in front of people who might be damaged by that. Keep it to yourself if you have to. Okay? So just as it would be wrong for an individual to eat meat sacrificed to idols if the person serving it warned them, because they have an issue with that, it would also be wrong for the Christian community to appear to participate in the worship of idols in the eyes of society. We must be considerate of their weak consciences and remember the greater goal of winning them to the gospel, winning society to the gospel, that is. In both cases, chapters 8 and 10, Paul is saying that we should not go out of our way to find out where the meat came from, given that specific problem. But if anyone has a problem with our eating it, we must abstain. This principle would be the same no matter what the topic or time of history, but we can use this as a guideline. Glorify God instead of self. This has been Paul's example, and the Christian community would do well to follow it. So, I think you get the point there. As he put it in Romans 14:17, the kingdom of God is not about food and drink, but righteousness, peace, and joy. And as the voice from heaven told Peter in Acts 10:15, when he was having that vision, he's waiting for dinner, and the people were coming to him from Cornelius, and before they got there, God gave him this vision of the animals, unclean animals, being lowered down in a bag, basically, a sheet held up by 4 corners and made a bag. And Peter said, no, I'm not going to eat those. Those are unclean animals. And he didn't say he didn't eat meat. He said, I'm not eating unclean animals. So in Acts 10:15, for the second time, is the voice from heaven told him, don't call something unclean that God has cleaned. So God was cleaning, he was preparing him for going out among Gentiles who were considered unclean. But what does this say about the topic of eating meat or not? If God says something is okay, then it's okay. So even if all of this is dismissed, and Paul actually only discussed meat offered to idols, like I mentioned a bit ago, it doesn't say that eating meat is wrong, and certainly not that abstaining from meat brings a person closer to God. Being a vegan does not make you more spiritual. In Romans 12:2, Paul said that we are transformed by the renewing of our minds. Walking with God is how we become closer to Him. The idea that diet can do this comes from other religions, such as Hinduism and Seventh-day Adventism. There's a lot of that going around. The Hinduism is more disguised, I would say. under different names. But Seventh-day Adventism is very popular in YouTube conspiracy channels, it seems, and they also, Ellen White, their founder, also was very much against eating meat of any sort, or cheese. So this is where you'll find somebody, people teaching that it's more spiritual to be vegan. Okay, it's not coming from the Bible. It's coming from teachings that are actually against the Bible. And Paul scolded people for punishing abstinence of certain foods for spiritual reasons in 1 Timothy 4:3. Let's go look at that. I don't have that one up already, so I'm going to go paste that here if I can get the right window active. Oh, I don't go down that far. Here, let me just use this one. It's a lot easier. They forbid people to marry and order them to abstain from certain foods which God created to be received with thanksgiving by those who believe and who know the truth. So Paul is scolding people who are trying to tell other people not to do this or that. You could read Galatians and Colossians about that too. It's like you're forbidding people to do certain things and eat certain things. This is wrong, Paul says. He says, on the other hand, be considerate of society, be considerate of weak faith Christians who have a delicate conscience or a fragile faith, but at the same time, it's wrong to teach that people should not do these things, should not eat meat or whatever it is. Hey, Truth Freeze. So, to be sure, the Bible does teach us to be kind to animals when it comes to the more modern issue, not that they're sacrificed to idols, but that they're mistreated. Proverbs 12:10 says to treat animals kindly. And if you had to kill an animal for food or sacrifice, it had to be done humanely. I mean, killing as itself is not a bad thing. You're not torturing an animal if you kill quickly. They're not suffering. They're more likely to suffer if they die a natural death when you think about it. But these are animals for a specific purpose, and the Bible says, you do a certain way and you don't make the animal suffer. There's nothing ever said even about people who were criminals or murderers or whatever. They weren't tortured. God never ordered that. Being put to death is not an act of cruelty. If there's a good reason for it, which is determined by God, which is either sacrifice or food, and in the case of humans, if they've done such a heinous crime that they need to be removed from the earth for everybody else's safety. So the question is not whether Christians should have healthy diets, but whether that means never eating meat. Because you can make a good case, I've seen it done in health food boards where everybody agrees that natural is better. Some will say no extreme meat, ketogenic diet, and others say no, you should eat only vegan diet, and there are people on both ends of that spectrum who will say I'm healthier because of this, I feel more spiritual, I'm more awake or aware or whatever it is. It's not the food. Whatever works for one person may not work for another, and God does not have a decree either way. So take care of your body, that's what the Bible teaches. But that doesn't mean don't eat meat, necessarily. So I would just conclude with a couple of points that first of all, it's okay to eat meat, according to the Bible, or drink alcohol, as long as you are considerate of those around you who may have a fragile faith. The second is to be kind to living things. That's throughout the Bible. Killing to eat is not unkind if you kill quickly. Third is what you eat or don't eat won't make you more spiritual. Fourth, don't look down on those who disagree with you on this matter. Those are the principles that we get out of all the teachings of the Bible. Animal abuse will not be stopped by people abstaining from eating meat. People will also abuse other people, and they abuse animals nobody eats. The problem is the human spirit, separated from God. If you want to do something, shut down the inhumane operations. And if meat then becomes too expensive or rare as a result, because not enough people can be fed, then you will still have met your goal. People won't eat meat not because of a conscience or not because of thinking they'll be more spiritual, but because the animals were being mistreated, and they will have to either learn, to produce more meat with humane methods, or do without. You know, I myself I'm mostly on dairy and hemp protein because I have digestive issues that make it easier. You know, I get nutrients better if it's in the, you know, the hemp powder has the amino acids already broken down, and it helps me. Okay, so that's why I do that. I still eat meat though. I mean, I like eggs and sausage and chicken. There's nothing wrong with that. And it isn't, you know, some people say, oh, that's harming your health. Well, you got to prove that. I will eat whatever it is that works best for my body, but you don't know that on the other side of the screen. You know, if you want to pay for the expensive test to know exactly what's going on with my blood chemistry and so forth, and the time it takes, and you know, you can self-diagnose all day long and never come to a conclusion. You need people who are to help you with that. So if you want to do all that for free, go for it. But until then, I don't have any proof that there's a correlation one-to-one between eating meat and poor health. So the bottom line is that we as Christians are free to enjoy God's creation, but not at the expense of anyone's health, even our own, physical or spiritual. If God says it's okay to eat animals for food, then it is. I mean, and why would God say that if it was harmful, intrinsically harmful? So when it comes to the vegan push going on in a lot of channels, I have to wonder what their motivations are if they're not purely for health reasons, and whether they acknowledge that people can be healthy on an all meat and fat diet. Because it's true. You know, the people who used to call it Eskimos, I think they're called Inuits now. A lot of people, a lot of places in the world would not survive without meat. And in times past especially, that was an issue, but you ate whatever you could find to eat to keep alive. And even people, you know, is it wrong to eat insects? There's a lot of people who live on that. There's some documentaries I've seen of South American tribes that are very remote that eat insects. A lot of them. They eat also animals that they catch themselves, but they eat meat. And they're living in vegetation. You know, they don't have farms. They're hunter-gatherers. And, you know, are you going to say they're not spiritual because of that? I hope not. So, when it comes to fragile faith, we have our guidelines from Scripture. And we have, you know, like I said, there's people on both sides of the health issue. But the Bible does not teach abstinence from meat. So, if anyone tries to say it does, I have to strongly disagree with them. So let me look at the chat now. Let's see if I can catch up here. Oh, I'm rolling the chat for you guys too. Hey, you can see what I'm doing because I'm rolling that one. The one I'm sharing. Why do people always assume baptism means with water? Yeah, exactly. John the Baptist, of all people, contrasted the water baptism he did with the fire and Holy Spirit baptism that Jesus would do. And Paul made a point of saying that he was happy he had not baptized many people. And Peter said something about, you know, not the washing of dirt from the body, but the pledge of a clear conscience before God. That's our baptism. Let's see what else in the chat. Cupcakes. I'm not going to get into that argument. But, you know, there's this pure chocolate cake with chocolate frosting that's called Devil's Food's cake. And, of course, the angel's food is the really white, spongy cake, which I never cared for that much. I'm a chocolate fiend, so what you going to do? But the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. The devil did not invent chocolate. So there. YouTube censorship. This room gathers the best people. Well, that's awfully nice to say. I think so, too. Sometimes we get some outliers, but take that word however you want. Cool. Yeah, this is the second time today. And I just run when I have something to say and time to say it. Sometimes those things don't happen at the same time, but people keep giving me all this fodder with their, you know, 300, 400, or 500 people watching someone say that Jesus never ate meat, and it just really gets me looking up scriptures to prove that that's a false teaching. I mean, it's pretty indisputable if you ask me. He did eat meat. Let's see what else in the chat. Ellen White buried in Michigan. An obelisk as a tombstone, how appropriate. But I'm not saying she was a terrible person or anything, but she had a lot of crazy bad teachings. Dessert diet, I'm all for that. Okay, I'm not sure what you... Oh, we've got a lot of similar names here, don't we? Deb Jones, good to see you. I didn't see your name yet, so I assume you're here. Truth Freeze. Yeah, the major brands of anything. I mean, you know, it's hard to find things in society that are not corrupt unless it's a local farm or business that you know the people. And even then, you know, there's a Mason Hall in every town, you know. I've actually had a bison burger once. It was kind of dry. I don't know if it needs to be mixed with something, but they're very low fat, which is why they were a fad for a while, bison meat. It tastes like beef to me, and I think it could use a little added fat, but, you know, it needs to be with something else, I think. But it does taste like beef. I have actually also tried rabbit. I mean, I kind of didn't want to, but I also didn't want to insult my host at the time, so I said okay, because he had caught it himself and was serving rabbit. So I said, okay, I'll taste a bite. Tasted like exactly like turkey to me, not chicken. Everything doesn't taste like chicken. Some of it tastes like turkey. But, you know, I tried it once, and that's what it tastes like to me. Yeah, there's no reason, even in bulk, you know, in quantity, that you couldn't kill animals humanely. I mean, they did that on the Passover. They had a lot of animals to sacrifice, and people ate the meat. So it wasn't like it was being wasted, and it wasn't like a blood fest. They had to drain the blood. You couldn't eat meat with the blood in it per Leviticus laws, or Levitical laws. And so it must be possible. We just have to we're so far detached from the places our food comes from that we don't even know. It's just like people would say about the death camps in Nazi Germany, if you want to, whatever you want to believe about that, that the average German didn't know. It was out of sight, out of mind, and didn't care to know. So we got people like that all over the world today, and even in America, where people will just not care what's going on, where anything comes from. It's just business is good, and so they don't ask enough questions. They don't hold people to account. Yep, only 4 things in the Jerusalem Council, Acts 15, which is about sexual purity and not eating animals that have been strangled or still had the blood in them. I forget what the 4th thing was, but I think you can find bison meat anywhere, but you'd have to, probably in the specialty section. Yeah, some people claim the exact opposite of kosher, that it means to make the animal suffer, you know, and have a lot of adrenaline in its blood, and you know, that you get some kind of power from it. But the Bible doesn't say that. Whether the Talmud says anything like that, I don't know. But the Bible does not say that, does not condone it, the mistreatment of animals of any kind. Let's see. Tarsus. Yes, reminds me of tartar sauce because we've been talking about food. Hey Mark, I think I said hi to you, everybody. Let's see. High beef red meat intake makes folks acidic for some people. So, yeah, everybody's different. That's the thing, is one size doesn't fit all when it comes to diet. And that's why it's so hard to self-diagnose. But yeah, I've been eating, like, I'll eat a bowl of Raisin Nut Bran for breakfast because nothing else keeps me regular. I mean, I've tried to avoid the grains, but I need that for some reason. And my smoothie has mostly, you know, it has like bananas, milk, bananas, strawberries, blueberries, dark cherries, pineapple. So I'm getting a variety of enzymes and potassium and things like that, plus the hemp powder, which gives the amino acids and some more fiber. So it's a pretty good. Oh, and Truth Freeze, I tried the black seed oil. I can't take it in my smoothie. I tried it on a salad, even just a few drops. Couldn't do that. It's just the wrong flavor. I would like it in chili, so I'll have to make chili sometime. That flavor is just a chili flavor to me, and I can't have it in other things. I tried, sorry, but we'll find a way. Eat more chili. Winter's coming, so that'll probably happen. Let's see. Yep, amino acids. Like I said, it's the reason people need meat is to get the amino acids. You can get them from the hemp powder, though, at least a lot of them. But the important thing is to make sure you get amino acids. I'm okay with that. I mean, and I like a good steak, but I don't crave it. So the thing is, I just want to make sure and between breakfast and the smoothie, I have all my nutrients for the day. All I need is like 500 more calories, so I can have whatever I want. Usually it's, whatever the family is having is decided on having, or whatever is available for leftovers in the fridge. Let's see, PETA is a total fraud. Yes, they are. They're hypocrites, like all ultra leftists, and which is the way of the world right now. Yeah, we don't use proper farming techniques. It's all Monsanto, which I think is trying to change their name or something. Wonder why. And all the chemicals and GMO. People aren't rotating crops like they're supposed to. And letting the land rest. That was another good thing that Israel did. Council of Jerusalem settled that Gentile converts. Yep. Let's see. Yeah, that's why I try to... You need a supplement of some kind, but I have trouble swallowing pills these days, so that's why I'm doing the smoothie. And feeling pretty good so far. It is probably more fructose than I should probably have, but it doesn't seem to be causing an issue with my blood sugar, as far as I know. And I've also, speaking of Bugs Bunny, yeah, I've had rabbit and I've had veal. So we eat rabbit, lamb, turkey, chicken, beef, pork, and deer. I forget what, it's been a long time since I've had the deer. I don't remember anything particularly distinctive about the flavor. But again, deer population can quickly overgrow and unbalance nature. So you have to call the herd, That, part of how that works is the deer would just overrun and ruin the balance of nature. And you have to take some of them out, and you might as well eat it, Why make it go to waste? Let's see, Carl's Jr. was using kangaroo meat. Okay, I guess people eat that. I didn't know. We don't have those around here. It was cheaper. Oh, okay. Well, if you put the right flavorings in it, you can make something taste like just about anything. Hey, Mike, sorry, did it again. Let's see, what else in the chat? Yeah, adrenaline, that's what the Satanists like. They like the suffering. I'm told that that's what they do with Islam, is make the animal suffer. But again, I don't know if that's true. I know it's not true about the Bible's teachings in any way. Whether anybody does that and say that's what the Bible says or not, I don't know, but they shouldn't. That would be a false teaching. Let's see, meat and dressing and sprouts. Sprouts are supposed to be good for you. Seeds, nuts. Yeah, you can get pretty good protein from nuts. I'm not a big seed fan, but again, I think there's, if you put some in a smoothie or something, hide it in some way, sprinkle it on a salad, I wouldn't have a problem with it, except that things tend to get stuck in my teeth and gums. And anyway, water. Yep, we have an under sink unit for drinking water and cooking water that's a reverse osmosis. Triple filters, got a solid carbon filter in it. Thing took us a year to pay for. I don't know how many years ago, but does a really good job, and the water tastes good. Yeah, I'll let somebody else figure out which weeds we can eat. I could probably feed people if I knew how to do that, but I don't. Plants. Most plants make me break out in a rash, actually, and the only plants I can't kill are thistles and dandelions. Which dandelions I know are supposedly edible and you can make tea out of it, but again, there are also things called false dandelions, and I'm like, okay, I give up. Somebody else can harvest my dandelions. Okay, Bayer bought Monsanto. I wonder what they'll call that. Let's see. Anything else in the chat? What model of who does use for what? Okay, I just have regular blender. I don't know what anybody's talking about. Farm fertilizer, yep. And it gets into the food, and the animals eat it too, so it gets into the meat, and you can't escape it. Let's see. Yeah, some people eat dogs in some cultures. I couldn't make myself do that no matter what. I'd have to be totally starved. And have, you know, even then I'd be probably starved. Chemtrails, yeah. People do eat squirrel. I've never had that. Plantain is bitter but packed in wild animals, nutrient dense. Yep, I'll let you guys figure, you know, you could make a business out of marketing healthy edible food, but the government will shut you down. I know about, you know, that's just how these things go. Apple cider vinegar, yep. Aerosol cooties, there you go. Let's see. Cookies, that's a much better word. I can go for that, but anymore I can't digest the really sweet pastries and things and cookies like I used to. Everything I know how to make is bad for you. Let's see. Yeah, I just do not have a green thumb. Apricot seeds, yep. They've tried to outlaw stuff like that. Laetril, was it, I think. And you have to be careful how you mix things and what parts of plants that you eat and what you eat it with. And that's where people who are really interested in that, have an aptitude for it, could, you know, be their part of the body and amass knowledge about edible plants. And there are books about edible plants, but still, I'm like, you know, that plant looks an awful lot like that poisonous thing. There was a story that was told of Anne Hutchinson or somebody like that, who back in the like 1800s in America, she was taking her daughter out for a walk in the woods and teaching her about life, and she picked up this one mushroom that the little girl identified and said, "You think that's edible?" And she says, "Yeah." She started to bring it toward her mouth, and her mom grabbed her by the wrist and said, "Turn it over." And she looked, and on the bottom side, she expected to see it all bumpy, you know, as the edible kind was. But this was smooth, and her mother said that is called a death angel, because for the next 3 days after you eat it, you will be expelling liquids from every part of your body, and you will welcome your death. I mean, it was a horrible mushroom to eat, and it looked exactly like a healthy mushroom, except you looked underneath, and she said this was a life lesson about people. You know, how you have to check under the hood and see what a person is really like inside. You can't go by, you know, judging a book by its cover. But the lesson also in this context is that, you know, you have to be careful about knowing your plants. And not everybody knows that and can harvest plants and take care of them and touch them without killing them or breaking out in a rash. So we're all good at different things for good reasons. Alligator. Okay, well, they're not cute, cuddly animals, but I guess they serve some sort of purpose, but they have to die too. So, and that's another thing the Bible said in the laws of Moses, was that you couldn't eat an animal that had already died by natural causes. You had to kill it yourself. It had to be alive when you went to kill it and eat it. Freshness, lack of disease, all sorts of reasons, but that was the rule. Let's see, so no roadkill for them. Never had frog legs, don't want to try them. But yeah, mammals and some of the reptiles, I guess, and insects are edible. Okay, model question wasn't for me. Alright, eat a mud pie. Well, some people do. They call that a disorder called pica, I think it is, where you don't have certain minerals and you eat dirt because your body says you need those. Let's see, berries and nuts. Yep. I put those in my smoothie. Yeah, you really have to know mushrooms. They can kill you. Jerky, nuts, and freeze-dried fruit. Yep. Yeah, Wendy Blank does know a lot about that. I don't, and I'm not sure I want to know. I want someone else to know it and just give me stuff. I'll trade you for something I know. Wendy keeps to herself. She has reasons, and she deals more with people in real life. Comments once in a while in my videos. You know, doesn't come to the live hangouts, but you can't blame people. I mean, so. But she's, if you ever see Wendy Blank, Wendy B, decent person. Let's see. Yeah, and know the plants of your area. That's a thing, too. That's a bad thing about people saying you should go to a certain place when society collapses, but if it's too far away, you won't know anybody, and they will consider you an outsider and another mouth to feed, so you might want to stay home in that scenario where you know things, you know, and know people. Yep. Good smoothie ingredients. Yeah, Vic, you can have the hard pears. I could never bite them very well, and especially not now, and I wasn't real keen on the flavor. Just a thing. One of the clampets. Alright, you didn't just say that, YouTube censorship. Ugh. Cat in a smoothie. No way. Alright, so any questions about the point tonight, which was about people with a fragile faith or a weak faith? I prefer to think of it as fragile, because weak people tend to think there's something wrong with you, but if you're fragile, you're delicate, they will handle you more carefully. And at the same time, the fragile one should not berate anyone who isn't fragile. And that the whole thing came out of the meat or no meat issue, whether it had to do with sacrifice to idols or not. The question today is whether it's bad for you, and that's a strictly health issue. It's not a God issue, because God says, eat whatever you want, and just make sure that you're not damaging someone's conscience in the process. So today it's not as much a matter of conscience unless you get into the animal abuse issue, which is a separate issue. It's not that it's bad to eat animal meat, it's bad to abuse animals and people. Although we don't eat those, hopefully. The Bible certainly does not condone that. So that was the point. Any questions? I'll probably shut down if there aren't any questions. Offered to idols today, really couldn't tell you, because I'm unless, you know, another religion had something, you know, whether it was Islam or, you know, I don't know if they actually offer it to idols, you know. But like Paul says, if you don't know, don't ask. Don't ask, don't tell, you know. But if somebody tells you because it's a matter of conscience for them, then you should say, well, then I will politely decline, because even though you know it's okay to eat that, and God says it's okay to eat that, be considerate of the people around you is the point. But I can't think of a modern day example of that, actually. Fragile faith with unholy living, not necessarily. People who wallow in sin it certainly is a weakness, but I don't know if it's a faith weakness. It's more of a ego weak, or, you know, ego is too strong, ego lacking weakness, and resolve being weak. But faith, for these, you know, in Paul's context, was about whether it bothered them to eat meat that had been offered to an idol. And in today, that's not an issue. So if a person's faith is delicate, it means we need to help them ground it and strengthen it. And if you did that, if a person did that, they grow spiritually, then they will not want to live an unholy life. They will want to, you know, this is the thing that the Lordship Salvationists get backwards. They think you have to clean up and then be saved. And the Bible says be saved and then God will clean you up, but you have to let him. You have to relinquish lordship of your own life to him out of gratitude, and that's not what saves you, it's what rewards you and makes you grow spiritually. And so a person with fragile faith is someone we need to be careful with, is all, and make sure that we help them to grow and strengthen. A friend that is going Hebrew roots, but You still eat bacon in front of her. That's up to you. It pains me to see people go that way, and so many people are being fooled by veganism and Hebrew roots and laws and rules and regulations and means of control, and I don't know how they read the New Testament, especially Paul, especially Galatians and Colossians, and still go that way. I don't understand it. Kit Kat is it? Yeah, I'm calling it Kit. They are yummy, but again, I can't eat as many of those as I like. Yeah, they don't eat pork. Muslims don't eat pork. So I'm like, I like bacon. You know, I'm told that there's some kind of seaweed that can taste like bacon. They'd have to prove that to me, but bacon's pretty tasty. I've never eaten lobster. I don't want to. One comedian, I think his name Jim Gaffigan, says it's like sea scorpion. And his other descriptions of seafood are pretty funny, but they're pretty gross too. So I've never been a big fan of seafood. The closest thing for me would be fish sticks. We used to eat would probably had very little fish in them. Dip them in ketchup or something. But I have had orange roughy that was pretty well in a nice restaurant once a long time ago. It was good with a white sauce, but generally I just don't like fish. Tofu turkey burgers. I like, there was the Far Side cartoon had Tofu the Beast and Spamalopes. There's a picture of these lions eating their prey in the grass, and one of them's looking up at the viewer, you know, just with this look of disgust on his face because he caught a Tofu the Beast. Roaches of the sea, shrimp. Yep, everybody else can have those. I don't want them. Who used to own Kit Kat before? As long as they don't change the formula, that's okay with me. No, I've had to eat liver before and never liked it. I don't know if it was how it was prepared, but I never liked it. I thought it was tough and disgusting. Even you couldn't bury it in enough ketchup. Yeah, Nestle is stealing water from the Great Lakes, and nobody seems to care. Fresh water, and I think it's being sold, taken also by China for pennies a gallon. Yep, and in Revelation there's a statement where God says God will destroy those who destroy the earth. They have it coming to them. Tofu is Soylent Green. Maybe so. Maybe that's what it tastes like. That was a trippy movie, Soylent Green. And it's partly true. I mean, now, you know, who knows what's in your food these days. Yeah, Nestle's pretty bad. So anyway, part of the reason I do so many hangouts lately is partly because people are, you know, teaching ridiculous things about the Bible, and the other part is there's no place else to go. I look for places to hang out, and I'm just either banned or disgusted. So everybody keep looking for good hangouts. Oh, is it? Okay, I didn't know that about tongue. I don't want to know, actually. Alright, anything else in chat? Thank you, YouTube censorship. Very nice of you to say. Sorry about background noise, and when I shut off the room so I can have it quieter in here, and then it gets too warm in the winter, so I turn on the air, and then it makes more noise. Aw, thank you, Mark. Grandmother made it. Yeah. The YouTube cupboard is bare. It's a dry, barren wasteland in YouTube. I think a lot of people have gone to Discord, which is fine with me, and Discord can have them, because I think that's half the reason we don't get trolled like we used to. They've all gone to Discord. Okay. Again, that's fine. I'm looking for quality over quantity, and I think we got that going on here. You know, from what I'm seeing in the chat. But kind of thirsty, kind of tired. Tongue, the food that tastes you back. Never eat anything that looks back at you. Or licks back at you. But, that's all I have, material-wise. It would be more interesting if we had people on panels. We haven't run it, the other channel, Blood Holy Science its level, but I don't do that unless Pillbox is available, and he has not been available for one reason or another. I'll have to ask him what's up with that. Crazy job. I have our family tree on my husband's side. I guess some of the people, the earlier settlers here, were pig farmers. And when asked what part of the pigs they use, and they said everything but the squeal. I mean, they made, you know, shoe leather out of the hide and all sorts of things. They said they use everything but the squeal. Yeah, we'll have to have a panel thing sometime. We could do that on the other channel if we want. You know, I don't care where that happens. I always am happier when somebody else runs a group channel because I have too many things I'm trying to pay attention to when I'm running. And if I was just joining somebody else's panel, it would be easier because then I can just sit there and think about what I'm saying and not have to manage windows and so forth. Okay, well, we have Hangout chats, the back chats we call them. We also have, Mark made it's not Discord, it's Slack. We did send out some invitations, but I think a lot of people are just reluctant to join anything else. So for the moment, it seems that we're stuck with YouTube. But it would be a place to communicate if we wanted to work out things like that. But yeah, no problem. If you get nervous, we won't go there. And anyone can, you know, as far as that Slack goes, there's nobody there right now but Mark, me, and Chow. And not much happening because we're the only ones there. But if anybody else wanted to join that so we can make arrangements for hangouts or whatnot, or keep in touch if we get kicked out of YouTube, that's mainly what it's for, as an alternative to YouTube. So we need to communicate somehow is the thing. And that's been the problem, is getting everybody into even just a typing chat in the background. And the nice thing also about, at least still on Hangout chats, is you can do a video call and you don't even have to be on camera. Just have a microphone and we can just talk instead of having to type to each other. But that's the problem, is we need to communicate somehow in private as a group. That would just make things easier. We need to, I don't especially want to be the person to organize that. And like I said, Mark has been trying, but it's hard to get feedback. So if we want this to happen, we're going to have to step out somewhere or another. All right. Yeah, there's different channels on the, Mark is explaining they call them channels within the server on Slack. You can only go by invitation, so there won't be trolls there. But he sets up different channels for different purposes, a prayer channel or a, Bible, theology, whatever, different topics. Something came out. Oh, hey, okay. Got your internet working. That's always nice. Yeah, at any time, anyone with a YouTube account can go into hangouts.google.com and invite people to, start a new call and invite people. And you can just chat, like we're typing now in this chat. Or you can do a voice call or voice and video, whichever you want to do. So anybody else wants to make that happen, just let me know and I'll join it. All right, the chat goes for a little bit after I quit, so you could still work things out, but otherwise, find a way to connect and let me know. All right, I'm going to go ahead and shut down then, because I think the point's been made and been kind of rambling, but sometimes you need to do that. So thanks for coming, and we'll see y'all later.